In 2021, the loudest cry from Zambian families was the lack of teachers and the 12-hour waits at clinics. Now, of course, ZESCO was an issue as well, but let's talk about that some other time. Today, in 2026, the government has essentially hired a small city. Since taking office, the UPND administration has added over 100,000 civil servants to the payroll. And this includes 3,500 teachers and 2,500 health workers currently being onboarded for 2026. To the mother in a rural ward, it's a social miracle. To the economist in Lusaka, it's a fiscal time bomb. Today, we break down the 62.6 billion Kwacha wage bill to see if this is an investment in human capital or just an election year bloat. Welcome to the Indaba. Let's have a look at the numbers, the 2021 versus 2026 leap, starting with education. In 2020, we roughly had 118,500 teachers. And by the end of this year, that number will hit 160,000. That is a 35% expansion in just 5 years. And then there's health. We started with 64,000 health workers in 2021. With the 2,500 new hires this month, we're crossing the 82,000 mark. Remarkable. So let's look at the analysis here, because this isn't just hiring for the sake of hiring. The pupil-teacher ratio was a staggering 67:1 in 2020. We're finally moving towards the 40:1 target as of now. But as we discussed in our CDF episode, bodies and buildings don't equal results unless they have the tools to work. Let's do the paycheck math here, because there's a 700 Kwacha hike. So let's talk about money. On February 5th, 2026, the government and unions concluded negotiations for a 700 Kwacha monthly basic salary increase, effective March 1st. Let's start with the micro view here, because for a mid-level nurse earning 10,000 Kwacha, this 700 Kwacha hike is a 7% bump. It helps offset the current inflation, but for many, it barely covers the rising cost of fuel and rent. But let's look at the macro view here. When you multiply even a small raise by 100,000 new people, you get a 62.6 billion Kwacha personal emoluments bill. For context, that is nearly 1/4 of our entire 253.1 billion Kwacha budget. We're now spending more on our civilian army than we are on our debt interest. And that is a massive shift in national priority. Now, here's the fiscal straitjacket and the tools gap for you financial analysts out there, because here's where it gets Zambia proof. The productivity risk is as follows. Hiring 18,000 medics is useless if they don't have gloves or paracetamol. So while the 2026 budget hiked drug funding by 30% to 6.4 billion Kwacha, the ZAMMSA supply chain is still the bottleneck. We risk paying for presence instead of performance. And then there's the revenue trap. Our domestic revenue is targeted at 22.3% of the GDP. But if copper prices tank or the drought persists, the 62.6 billion Kwacha wage bill is a fixed cost. You can't lay off 40,000 teachers to save the budget. We've built a high-maintenance machine, and now we must ensure the economy generates enough steam to keep it going. And there's merit versus politics at play. The Auditor General's 2025 report still warns of ghost workers. And if the 2026 recruitment drive isn't transparent, then we aren't buying GDP growth. We're buying political patronage. And that's something we have to avoid at all costs. Here's my return on investment verdict. Hiring 100,000 people is the biggest gamble of the 2020s. If these teachers produce a smarter workforce and these medics reduce maternal mortality, well, then they pay for themselves 10 times over. If they sit in empty clinics and overcrowded schools without desks, well, then they sink the ship. Let's have an Indaba right now. Is the 62.6 billion Kwacha wage bill the best way to spend your tax money? Or should we have put more of that into energy and roads to help the private sector hire those people instead? Have an Indaba in the comments. In the next episode, we look at the other side of the empowerment coin, the CDF loans. We will give a deep dive into youth disbursements successes, or maybe they weren't. Anyway, until then, like, subscribe, and stay productive. Stay Zambia proof. Till then.